The roar of the jet engine softened as passengers settled into their seats aboard the flight from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles. Among them, unnoticed by most, was Barron Trump. Tall for his age and with a quiet demeanor, he had perfected the art of blending into the background despite his high-profile lineage. This was his first solo trip, a break from the constant limelight, and he was looking forward to the chance to read, relax, and reflect. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Seated in the front row of the first-class cabin, Barron looked out the window as the ground crew bustled below. He was no stranger to the privileges that came with his family name, yet he often found himself yearning for simpler, more genuine interactions. While adjusting his seatbelt, his attention was drawn to a commotion at the gate. A man in uniform, rugged and resolute, was engaged in a quiet but tense discussion with the airline staff. The man, clearly a Navy SEAL judging by the insignias on his uniform, appeared to have been bumped from the flight due to an overbooking error. Barron watched as the man's shoulders sagged slightly, his face a mask of disappointment. The SEAL had a calm yet commanding presence, his posture exuding strength despite the apparent setback. Intrigued, Barron leaned closer, catching snippets of the conversation. The man was returning home after a grueling deployment overseas. His voice was steady but tinged with urgency. His wife had gone into early labor, and he was desperate to be by her side. Without hesitation, Barron unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. The cabin crew noticed and approached him, but he waved them off politely. He stepped out into the aisle and walked toward the gate agent. "Excuse me," he said softly, his tone steady but kind. "I'll give up my seat. Let him have it." The agent blinked in surprise, clearly recognizing the young man. A murmur rippled through the boarding area, as those nearby realized what was happening. The Navy SEAL looked at Barron, his expression shifting from confusion to gratitude. "You don't have to do that," the man said, his voice deep but warm. Barron shook his head, offering a small smile. "It's okay, you need it more than I do." Reluctantly, the SEAL accepted, shaking Barron's hand firmly. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to me." Barron gathered his belongings and moved to the back of the plane, finding an empty seat in coach. As he settled in, he couldn't help but notice the whispers and glances from other passengers. He pulled out a book, determined to ignore the attention, but the act of kindness had already taken on a life of its own. As the flight progressed, the cabin crew discreetly approached Barron with a message. "The gentleman you helped wanted us to pass this along," one of the attendants said, handing him a folded note. Barron unfolded it and read the heartfelt words of gratitude from the SEAL, who promised to pay the gesture forward. Touched, but slightly embarrassed, Barron tucked the note into his pocket and returned to his book. Hours later, as the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Barron gathered his things and prepared to disembark. He expected nothing more than to slip away quietly, but the moment he stepped into the terminal, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. A group of people, many of them veterans, stood waiting with signs and flags. Among them was the Navy SEAL who had somehow managed to organize the impromptu gathering to express his thanks. The crowd erupted into applause as Barron approached, his cheeks reddening with embarrassment. The SEAL stepped forward, introducing Barron to his wife and their newborn daughter via a video call. "This wouldn't have been possible without you," the man said, his voice cracking. The crowd cheered again, their admiration for the young man evident. Word of the incident spread quickly, capturing the attention of social media and news outlets. Barron, however, shied away from the spotlight, declining interviews and insisting that his actions weren't extraordinary. "Anyone would have done the same," he told one persistent reporter before slipping out of view. What followed, however, was something even Barron couldn't have anticipated. Inspired by his gesture, a wave of goodwill swept across the nation. Stories of strangers helping strangers began to surface, each one linked back to the young man who had quietly given up his first-class seat. Veterans organizations reached out to Barron, inviting him to speak at events, but he politely declined, choosing instead to support their efforts behind the scenes. Back in Washington, D.C., Barron returned to his routine, quietly continuing his studies and hobbies. Yet the story of his act of kindness refused to fade. Months later, he received an invitation to a special ceremony at the Pentagon. Reluctantly, he agreed to attend, unsure of what to expect. The event turned out to be a celebration of unsung heroes, with Barron as the guest of honor. The Navy SEAL he had helped was there, along with his wife and baby girl. In a heartfelt speech, the SEAL recounted the story, highlighting how Barron's simple act had a profound impact on his life. The room erupted in applause as Barron, visibly moved, accepted a commemorative plaque. As the evening progressed, Barron found himself in conversations with veterans and service members who shared their own stories of sacrifice and resilience. Inspired, he began to see the potential for creating lasting change. Over time, he collaborated with several organizations to launch initiatives supporting military families, focusing on education and health care. The story of Barron Trump giving up his seat for a Navy SEAL became a symbol of compassion and unity, a reminder of the power of small acts of kindness. For Barron, it was never about recognition or praise. It was simply about doing what felt right. Yet, in that moment of selflessness, he had sparked a movement that touched countless lives, proving that even the smallest gestures can have the most profound impact. As Barron Trump stood amidst the veterans and service members gathered at the Pentagon event, his mind wandered to the moment on the plane that had set everything in motion. It still felt surreal to him. He hadn't given up his seat for the recognition or applause. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. Yet here he was, being celebrated as a symbol of selflessness, a role he hadn't sought but now felt compelled to embrace with dignity. Over the next several months, Barron's involvement in military family initiatives began to take shape. What started as quiet contributions to existing organizations soon grew into a larger vision. He became deeply aware of the challenges military families faced: long separations, the uncertainty of deployments, and the struggle to reintegrate into civilian life. He spent countless evenings researching, meeting with veterans, and visiting support centers, each interaction deepening his resolve to make a tangible difference. One of the stories that struck him most came from a woman named Marissa, the wife of a deployed Marine. She spoke about how difficult it was to maintain a sense of normalcy for her two young children while managing the loneliness and anxiety of her husband's absence. Her youngest son had trouble sleeping without his father's nightly bedtime stories, so she would record voice notes from her husband whenever she could and play them back for their son. The practice helped, but it wasn't enough to fill the void. Her story lingered with Barron, sparking an idea. He reached out to developers and technologists, pitching an innovative concept, an app designed specifically for military families to stay connected during deployments. The app would include features like real-time messaging, voice recording, video sharing, and even interactive bedtime stories where parents could record themselves reading popular children's books. It would also offer mental health resources, financial planning tools, and a secure space for families to share milestones, like birthdays or anniversaries. Funding the app was a challenge, but Barron was determined not to rely solely on his family's influence or wealth. He partnered with several veteran-owned businesses and nonprofits, persuading them to join the effort. Over time, the app, which they named Homefront Connect, came to life. When it launched, it quickly gained traction among military families who praised its ability to bridge the emotional gap during separations. But Barron didn't stop there. He wanted to address the root issues that made military life so challenging for families. He convened a summit in Washington, D.C., bringing together policymakers, military leaders, and advocates. The discussions were raw and honest, tackling everything from housing shortages on military bases to the inadequate mental health support available to veterans and their families. Barron listened more than he spoke, taking meticulous notes and forming actionable plans. One of the outcomes of the summit was a groundbreaking initiative to improve housing conditions on military bases. Barron worked tirelessly to secure funding for renovations, focusing on creating safe, comfortable environments where families could thrive. He visited construction sites, spoke with architects, and even helped design playgrounds for children living on base. Each project carried his personal touch, a reflection of his deep commitment to the cause. The media, of course, continued to take notice. Barron's transformation from a quiet teenager to an emerging philanthropist fascinated the public. He was often compared to his father, but Barron remained steadfast in carving his own path. Interviews and profiles painted him as thoughtful and genuine, a young man driven not by fame but by a desire to make a lasting impact. Despite the growing attention, Barron remained grounded. He maintained a small circle of friends and found solace in his hobbies, particularly photography. His camera became a tool for storytelling, capturing moments of resilience and hope during his visits with military families. Some of his photographs featuring fathers reuniting with their children or mothers juggling careers and parenthood were later showcased in a gallery exhibit titled Faces of Sacrifice. The exhibit raised significant funds for military charities and deepened the public's understanding of the human side of service. One evening, as Barron sat reviewing letters from families who had benefited from his efforts, he came across a particularly poignant message. It was from a young girl named Ellie, whose father had been deployed for most of her life. She wrote about how Homefront Connect had allowed her to share her drawings and school projects with her dad, making her feel closer to him even when he was far away. She included one of her drawings, a crayon depiction of a soldier standing under a bright yellow sun with the words, "My Hero," scrawled above. Ellie's letter stayed with Barron, pushing him to think even bigger. He began exploring ways to expand his initiatives internationally, recognizing that the challenges faced by military families weren't unique to the United States. With the help of his team, he established partnerships with organizations in allied countries, creating a global network of support. The international expansion of Homefront Connect brought together families from diverse backgrounds, fostering a sense of shared experience and solidarity. As Barron's influence grew, so did his understanding of leadership. He was invited to speak at global forums, where he shared his vision for a world where the sacrifices of military families were met with unwavering support. His speeches were heartfelt and eloquent, emphasizing the importance of empathy and action. He often spoke about the ripple effect of kindness, drawing on the moment when he gave up his seat for the Navy SEAL as the catalyst for everything that followed. Yet amidst the accolades and achievements, Barron never lost sight of the individual stories that inspired him. He continued to meet with families, listening to their struggles and celebrating their triumphs. On one occasion, he attended a small-town parade honoring a local soldier who had returned home after a year-long deployment. Barron was invited as a guest of honor, but chose to stand among the crowd, applauding alongside the community. When the soldier approached him to express his gratitude, Barron simply shook his hand and said, "Thank you for your service." Over time, Barron's work began to influence policy at the highest levels. Lawmakers introduced bipartisan legislation inspired by his initiatives, addressing issues like spousal employment, child education, and mental health care for veterans. Barron was often consulted during the drafting process, his insights shaped by countless conversations with those directly affected. Despite his growing responsibilities, Barron remained a teenager at heart. He found moments to unwind with his friends, playing soccer or exploring the streets of Washington, D.C. with his camera. These moments of normalcy kept him grounded, a reminder that his identity wasn't solely defined by his last name or his philanthropic work. Years later, as Barron prepared to attend college, his legacy was already firmly established. Homefront Connect had become a cornerstone of support for military families, and his housing initiatives had transformed countless communities. The stories of gratitude continued to pour in, each one a testament to the impact of his efforts. On the eve of his departure for college, Barron received an unexpected visitor. The Navy SEAL, whose seat he had given up all those years ago, stood at the doorstep, accompanied by his wife and their daughter, now a vibrant young girl. They presented Barron with a framed photograph of the moment the SEAL had reunited with his wife at the hospital. The caption read, "Because of you." Barron was overwhelmed, struggling to find the words to express his feelings. He invited them in, and they spent the evening reminiscing and reflecting on how a single act of kindness had created a chain reaction of positive change. As they talked, Barron realized that his journey was far from over. The work he had started would continue, fueled by the same compassion and determination that had driven him from the beginning. When Barron finally left for college, he carried with him not only the experiences of his past, but also a vision for the future. He knew there was still so much to do, so many lives to touch, and he was ready to face the challenges ahead. For Barron Trump, the story was never about fame or recognition. It was about humanity, connection, and the belief that even the smallest gestures can change the world. As Barron Trump settled into his college life, he carried with him a sense of purpose that extended far beyond his studies. While his academic focus lay in international relations and technology, his passion for supporting military families and fostering goodwill continued to drive him. College life brought new perspectives, and Barron found himself surrounded by peers from diverse backgrounds, many of whom were unaware of the struggles faced by military families. Eager to broaden understanding, he began hosting informal talks and discussions on campus, sharing stories and insights from his experiences. These gatherings often turned into collaborative brainstorming sessions, with students suggesting innovative ideas to expand the impact of his initiatives. One student, an engineering major, proposed integrating virtual reality technology into Homefront Connect to simulate real-time shared experiences between deployed service members and their families. Inspired by the idea, Barron worked with the student to bring it to life. The feature allowed families to virtually spend time together, whether by walking through a park or watching a movie, bridging the emotional and physical distance in new ways. At the same time, Barron began advocating for younger generations to get involved in volunteerism and philanthropy. He launched a campus-based initiative called One Small Step, aimed at encouraging students to identify everyday opportunities to make a positive difference. From organizing care packages for deployed soldiers to mentoring the children of military families, the program quickly gained traction, becoming a model for similar initiatives at universities across the country. Outside of college, Barron continued to engage with his network of military families and advocates. One weekend, he visited a rural town in Kentucky that had a large population of veterans struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. The visit was eye-opening, exposing him to the economic and social barriers that prevented many veterans from accessing essential services. Moved by their stories, Barron worked with local organizations to establish a community resource hub. The hub provided job training, mental health counseling, and financial planning services all under one roof. It became a lifeline for the community, and Barron frequently checked in to ensure its success. Despite his growing responsibilities, Barron made a conscious effort to stay connected with the people who had inspired his journey. He continued corresponding with Ellie, the young girl whose drawing had deeply touched him. Over the years, Ellie's family became close friends with Barron, often joining him at events to share their story. Watching Ellie grow and thrive served as a constant reminder of why he had started his work in the first place. By the time Barron reached his junior year, his initiatives had expanded globally. He collaborated with international organizations to create a coalition dedicated to improving the quality of life for military families worldwide. His work earned him accolades from various governments and institutions, but Barron remained focused on the mission, always directing the spotlight back to the families he served. In quiet moments, Barron would reflect on how everything had started with a simple act of kindness aboard a plane. That single decision had set off a chain of events he could never have imagined, leading him to discover his purpose and forge a path of compassion and impact. It reinforced his belief that no gesture was too small to make a difference, and that even in the most unexpected moments, one choice could change countless lives. As Barron's college years drew to a close, he began to realize the full scope of the journey he had undertaken. What had once been a spontaneous act of kindness had blossomed into a lifelong mission. With his academic career behind him, Barron's next steps seemed clear. He had established a foundation that worked in close collaboration with both public and private sectors to ensure that the issues facing military families were addressed systematically. Barron's work had led to substantial improvements in veterans' health care, education, and post-service support, but he knew there was still much more to be done. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Barron Trump giving up his first-class seat for a Navy SEAL? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.